My life, in its 78th year, had settled into a rhythm as comfortable and predictable as the tides. My world was my small, paid-off bungalow in a quiet corner of Ohio, the garden I tended with aching but willing hands, and most importantly, Rusty. He wasn't just a dog. He was a furry, four-legged chronicle of the last 14 years of my life. I'd found him at a rescue, a gangly, caramel-colored mutt with ears too big for his head and a heart full of unspent love. My husband Robert had just passed, and the silence in our home was a physical weight. Rusty, with his goofy grin and clumsy paws, had chased that silence away. Now his muzzle was a distinguished silver, his gait was slow and arthritic, and his naps were long and deep. His golden brown eyes, clouded with age, still held the same unconditional adoration they had on day one. Our days were a simple, beautiful routine. I'd wake to the gentle thump, thump, thump of his tail against the floorboards. We'd have breakfast together, oatmeal for me, a special soft food concoction for his old teeth. We'd watch the morning news from my worn floral armchair, his heavy head resting on my knee. Our walks were short, more of a slow amble to the end of the block and back, but he sniffed every blade of grass with the same enthusiasm he'd had as a pup. He was my confidant, my shadow, and my oldest living friend. He was the warm, breathing presence that assured me I was not alone in the world. My son Mark called every Sunday. He lived 3 states away, a busy executive with a wife, Tiffany, and 2 teenage children I rarely saw. The calls were brief, filled with updates about his career, his portfolio, and their plans for a bigger house. He'd always ask, "How are you doing, Mom?" But it was a perfunctory question, a box to be checked. When he'd ask about Rusty, it was with a touch of impatience. "Is that old mutt still kicking?" he'd say, a joke that always landed with a thud in my heart. I knew Mark had never understood my bond with the dog. He saw Rusty as an expense, a nuisance, a relic of a past he was eager to move beyond. For me, Rusty was my present. He was the steady beat of a heart next to mine, the reason to get up in the morning, the silent witness to my joys and my sorrows. The vet said he was in his twilight, that we had to be prepared. And I was. I was prepared to give him every comfort, every kindness, for whatever time we had left. I thought that was a simple, decent thing to want. I had no idea that my son, my only child, would soon ask me to betray it all. I believed my final years would be like my days with Rusty, quiet, peaceful, and filled with a gentle, uncomplicated love. I was wrong. The storm was gathering, and its first winds would soon blow right through my front door, threatening to tear apart the small, precious world I had so carefully built. The phone rang on a Tuesday, an unusual day for Mark to call. His voice, normally clipped and confident, was strained. "Mom, we need to talk," he began, and my stomach immediately tightened. He explained that his aggressive investment in a tech startup had gone belly up. They had lost a significant amount of money and had to sell their large house in a hurry to cover the debt. They were, in his carefully chosen words, in transition. I listened, my heart aching for his struggle, the mother in me instantly wanting to help. Then came the part that changed everything. "So, Tiffany and the kids and I were thinking, we could come stay with you for a little while. Just 6 months, maybe a year, until we get back on our feet. It'll be great. We can help you out around the house, keep an eye on you." The offer was wrapped in the language of care, but I knew what it was, a move of desperation. My 2-bedroom bungalow, which had felt so spacious with just me and Rusty, suddenly seemed suffocatingly small. But he was my son. How could I say no? "Of course, Mark," I said, my voice softer than my feelings. "Your home is always your home." The day they arrived felt less like a family reunion and more like an invasion. A giant moving truck blocked the entire street, and Mark directed movers with an air of frantic importance. Tiffany, thin and impeccably dressed, surveyed my cozy, lived-in home with a look of barely concealed horror. "It's quaint, Eleanor," she said, running a manicured finger over my dusty mantelpiece. The kids, absorbed in their phones, grunted hellos and immediately claimed the guest room, their loud music soon vibrating through the thin walls. The disruption to our quiet life was immediate and total. My peaceful mornings were replaced by the chaos of 4 other people vying for the single bathroom. The scent of potpourri and old books was overpowered by Tiffany's expensive, cloying perfume. But the biggest source of friction was Rusty. From the moment they walked in, Tiffany treated him like a piece of vermin. "Ugh, the smell," she'd whisper loudly to Mark. "Does he have to lie right there?" she'd complain as she sidestepped his bed in the living room. She recoiled if his tail brushed her leg. Mark, stressed and eager to placate his wife, began to adopt her attitude. "Mom, can't you keep him in your room? He's shedding all over the new sofa cover." The sofa cover, a sterile gray sheet, had been Tiffany's first act of redecorating. Rusty, sensitive to the shift in atmosphere, grew anxious. He'd stick closer to my side than ever, his old eyes following Tiffany with a weary apprehension. I tried to keep him out of the way, to minimize the friction, but it was impossible. He was a part of the house, a part of me. Every sigh from Tiffany, every impatient command from Mark, felt like a personal attack. The house was no longer my sanctuary. It had become a battleground, and my poor, innocent old friend was unknowingly at the center of the conflict. The situation came to a head about a month after they moved in. It was a miserable, rainy Thursday. I was in the kitchen, carefully mashing up Rusty's dinner with a little warm broth to make it more appealing, when Tiffany walked in. She was on her phone, pacing and speaking in a hushed, angry tone. She saw what I was doing, and her face twisted into a mask of disgust. She ended her call abruptly. "Eleanor, are you seriously preparing food for that dog on the same counter where we eat?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. I felt a flush of anger. "I'll clean it thoroughly, Tiffany. I always do." "That's not the point," she snapped. "The point is that this whole situation is unsanitary. The hair, the drool, the constant clicking of his nails on the floor, it's driving me crazy. Last night he whimpered for an hour straight. I couldn't sleep. He's old and he's suffering. It's cruel to keep him around." "He is not suffering," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "He has arthritis, and he was having a bad night. He is a member of this family." She laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "He's an animal, Eleanor, and frankly, he's a mangy one. Mark and I have been talking. This isn't working." Later that evening, Mark cornered me in the living room. Tiffany and the kids were out, and the house was quiet for the first time all day. Rusty was asleep at my feet, his flank rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. Mark stood over me, his arms crossed, his face a grim mask of resolve. "Mom, we have a problem," he said, skipping any pretense of pleasantry. "Tiffany is at her wit's end with the dog. She says she can't live like this." I looked from my son's hardened face down to the sleeping creature beside me. "Mark, he's 14 years old. He's harmless. He just needs a little extra care." "He needs to be put down, Mom. That's the humane thing to do," Mark said, his voice cold and clinical. I felt the air leave my lungs. "Absolutely not. I will not kill my best friend to make Tiffany more comfortable." Mark's face darkened. He began to pace, his agitation filling the small room. "I knew you'd be like this. You always put that dog before everyone else. You care more about him than you do about your own family, about me." "That's not true, and you know it," I cried, my voice cracking. "I opened my home to you when you had nowhere else to go." "And we're grateful," he shot back, his voice rising. "But we can't live in a kennel. Tiffany is ready to walk, Mom. She'll take the kids and go to her sister's. Is that what you want? To break up my family over a smelly old dog?" The threat hung in the air, suffocating me. He was making me choose. It was a choice so monstrous, so cruel, I couldn't believe my own son was presenting it. He stopped pacing and stood directly in front of me, his eyes cold and hard. "So this is it," he said, his voice low and final. "It's me or that mangy dog. You have to make a choice. Who is more important to you?" I refused to give him an answer. How could I? It wasn't a choice. It was emotional blackmail. I stood up, my old knees shaking, and simply said, "Don't you ever speak to me like that again, Mark," before retreating to my bedroom with Rusty padding slowly behind me. I shut the door, a flimsy barrier against the toxicity that had filled my home. For the next few days, an icy silence descended. Mark and Tiffany spoke to me only when absolutely necessary. their faces tight with resentment. I, in turn, focused all my energy on Rusty, giving him extra cuddles, whispering reassurances into his soft ears, as if he could understand the turmoil he was at the center of. I clung to the hope that Mark's ultimatum was just an angry outburst, that his conscience would eventually win out over Tiffany's influence. I was a fool to believe he still had one. The following Tuesday, I had my annual checkup with my cardiologist, an appointment I couldn't miss. I was hesitant to leave, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. "You'll look after Rusty for a couple of hours, won't you, Mark?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He just grunted an affirmative from behind his laptop, not even looking at me. I gave Rusty a kiss on his graying head, told him I'd be back soon, and left, my heart heavy with a nameless dread. The appointment ran long. When I finally got home, the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the lawn. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful quiet I was used to, but a deep, hollow emptiness. The house felt vacant. I called out, "Hello, I'm home!" No answer. Mark's car was gone. I walked into the living room and my blood ran cold. Rusty's bed, his favorite plaid cushion by the armchair, was gone. His water bowl, always kept full by the kitchen door, was missing. A frantic panic clawed at my throat. I ran to my bedroom, praying he was just napping on my bed. He wasn't there. I checked every room, my calls of "Rusty, Rusty boy," growing more desperate and shrill. The house was empty. My hands trembling, I pulled out my phone and dialed Mark. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice casual. "Hey, Mom, how is the doctor?" "Mark, where is Rusty?" I demanded, my voice breaking. There was a pause. "Oh, yeah, about that. I took care of the problem." "What do you mean you took care of it?" I whispered, already knowing the answer was something I didn't want to hear. "I did what you couldn't bring yourself to do," he said, a note of self-righteousness in his tone. "I dropped him off at a shelter on the other side of the county. A nice place. They'll find him a new home, or, do what's necessary. It's for the best. Now Tiffany and I can finally breathe." The world tilted. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. I sank into my armchair, the spot where Rusty's head should have been resting on my lap, now achingly empty. He hadn't just gotten rid of my dog. He had waited until my back was turned, used my trust against me, and abandoned my 14-year-old, arthritic, loyal companion to an unknown fate among strangers. He hadn't just chosen Tiffany over the dog. He had ripped out a piece of my heart and thrown it away like garbage. In the echoing silence of my home, I finally understood. I didn't have a son anymore. I had a stranger living under my roof. For the first hour, I was paralyzed by grief and shock. I sat motionless in my armchair, staring at the empty space where Rusty's bed had been. The silence in the house was a roaring accusation. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like his clicking nails. Every gust of wind sounded like his soft whimper. But then a new feeling began to smolder beneath the layers of pain, rage, a cold, clear, clarifying anger. Mark had called my love for Rusty a weakness. He was about to find out it was my greatest strength. I picked my phone back up from the floor, my hands now steady. He said he'd dropped him at a shelter on the other side of the county. It was vague, intentionally so, meant to be a dead end. But I wasn't going to let it be. I went to my office, pulled out a notepad and a pen, and sat down at my computer. I started with a Google search. Animal shelters in and around Franklin County. The list was long. I started with the largest, most well-known humane societies and began to call. The first few calls were a blur of well-meaning but unhelpful receptionists. "Can you describe the dog, ma'am?" they'd ask. "He's a medium-sized mutt," I'd explain, my voice cracking. "Caramel-colored fur, a gray muzzle, big brown eyes. His name is Rusty. He's 14 and has bad arthritis." The response was always the same. A few moments of typing, then a gentle, "I'm sorry, ma'am. We don't have a dog matching that description that's come in today." With each no, a piece of my hope chipped away, but my determination hardened. I created a system. I'd call a shelter, get a negative, and cross it off my list. Then I'd move to the next. I called pounds, city kennels, private rescues, no-kill shelters, and even places that I knew had a grim reputation. I spent hours on the phone, listening to hold music, repeating Rusty's description until the words felt foreign in my mouth. I described his crooked ear, the little white patch on his chest, the way his tail curled just so. I was painting a portrait of my best friend to a series of strangers, begging them to see him. Mark and Tiffany came home in the middle of my phone marathon. They walked in with shopping bags, laughing about something. The laughter died when they saw me, phone pressed to my ear, a list of names and numbers in front of me, my face pale and tear-streaked. "Mom, what are you doing?" Mark asked, a hint of irritation in his voice. "You're not seriously trying to find him, are you? I told you it's for the best." I didn't even look at him. I held up a hand to silence him and continued my call. "Yes, I'll hold," I said into the phone, my eyes boring into his. He saw the look on my face and for the first time seemed to realize he had made a profound miscalculation. He and Tiffany retreated to their room, closing the door. The sun went down. I made my way through the entire list for Franklin County and started on the neighboring counties. My voice was hoarse, my hope dwindling to a flicker. I was on my 37th call, my spirit nearly broken, when a young woman's voice on the other end said something different. "Wait, an older gentleman, golden brown fur, very sweet but walks a little stiff, came in this afternoon?" Hope, fierce and painful, surged through me. "Yes, that sounds like him. His name is Rusty." "The man who dropped him off didn't leave a name for the dog or for himself," she said gently. "He just said he couldn't keep him. The dog is very scared and confused. We have him in a quiet kennel with a warm blanket. We call ourselves the Warm Paws Haven." The name was so kind, so full of grace that I started to sob. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of overwhelming, bone-deep love for my old dog. I had a location. I had a destination. I had a chance. I scribbled down the address for the Warm Paws Haven. It was nearly an hour's drive away, in a rural part of the next county over. It was almost 9 p.m., but I didn't care. "You're closing soon, aren't you?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "We close at 8, the young woman replied. "But you sound very distressed. My name is Sarah. I'm the manager. If you can get here safely in the next hour, I'll wait for you." Her kindness was a balm on my raw, scraped soul. I grabbed my purse and car keys, ignoring Mark and Tiffany as they peeked out of their room. "Mom, where are you going? It's late," Mark said, a note of alarm in his voice. I turned to face him, my expression as cold and hard as I could make it. "I'm going to go undo the monstrous thing you did today," I said, and walked out the door without another word. The drive was a blur of dark country roads and the hypnotic flash of white lines on the asphalt. My mind raced. Was it really him? Was he okay? What state would he be in? I pictured him alone, terrified, surrounded by the barking of strange dogs and the smell of fear. The thought fueled my speed. I finally saw the sign, a simple, hand-painted board. The Warm Paws Haven. It was a small, modest building, but the windows glowed with a warm, welcoming light. A young woman with a kind face and a practical ponytail, Sarah, was waiting for me by the door. "Eleanor?" she asked softly. I nodded, unable to speak. "Come on in," she said, her voice full of compassion. "He's in the back. He's been very quiet, just lying on his blanket. He wouldn't eat or drink anything." She led me through a hallway lined with clean, well-kept kennels. The barking was surprisingly subdued, a testament to the calm atmosphere of the place. She stopped in front of a kennel in a quiet corner. And there he was, my Rusty. He was curled into a tight ball on a thick blue blanket, looking smaller and older than I had ever seen him. He lifted his head slowly as we approached, and his cloudy eyes widened. For a moment, he just stared, as if he couldn't believe it. Then a low whimper escaped his throat, and his tail gave a weak thump, thump, thump against the blanket. Sarah unlocked the door, and I knelt, my old joints protesting. "Rusty," I whispered. "Oh, my sweet boy, I'm here." He scrambled to his feet stiffly and painfully, and hobbled into my arms, burying his face in my coat. I hugged him tightly, tears streaming down my face, my fingers tangling in his familiar, soft fur. He was real. He was safe. I held him for a long time, murmuring to him, telling him he was a good boy, that I was so sorry. Sarah stood back, giving us our moment, her expression one of profound understanding. She had given him a warm bed. She had shown him kindness when my own son had shown him cruelty. She had waited for me. As I stroked Rusty's back, feeling the tremor of relief run through his old body, an idea began to form in my mind. It was a seed of righteous anger, planted by Mark's betrayal and now being watered by this stranger's compassion. Mark thought my fortune, the house, the savings Robert and I had worked our whole lives for, was his birthright. He believed he was entitled to it. In that moment, holding my beloved friend who had been discarded like trash, I decided Mark was entitled to absolutely nothing. My legacy, my money, would not reward cruelty. It would reward kindness. It would go to the place that had given my oldest friend a warm bed on the coldest night of his life. The next morning, with Rusty safely back home and sleeping soundly in his proper bed, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. The grief and panic of the previous day had been forged into a diamond-hard resolve. Mark and Tiffany were tiptoeing around me, their faces a mixture of guilt and apprehension. They had seen me return with Rusty late last night, and the sight of him, alive and back in his rightful place, had shattered their narrative that this was for the best. They said nothing. I said nothing. The silence was my weapon now, and I wielded it with precision. After feeding Rusty his breakfast and taking him for a gentle walk around the garden, I went to my office and closed the door. I didn't reach for the phone book. I knew my lawyer's number by heart. Robert and I had hired Mr. Davison over 30 years ago to draft our original wills. He was old school, thorough, and discreet. Exactly what I needed. "Eleanor, what a pleasant surprise," he said, his voice a familiar, comforting baritone. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Hello, Arthur," I said, my voice even and calm. "I need to make an appointment. I'd like to make some significant changes to my will. As soon as possible, if you please." There was a slight pause. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Everything is about to be," I replied. "How is tomorrow at 10? I met him at his downtown office, a place of dark wood, leather-bound books, and quiet dignity. I had dressed carefully, in a smart navy blue suit, my hair perfectly coiffed. I wanted to project an image of absolute soundness of mind. Mr. Davison ushered me in, offering me coffee and asking after my health. After the pleasantries were out of the way, he leaned forward, his hands clasped on his large mahogany desk. "Now, Eleanor," he began gently. "You mentioned significant changes. Your current will is quite straightforward. Everything is to be left to your son, Mark." I took a deep breath. "That is the change, Arthur. I want to write a new will, a complete and total replacement of the old one." I then proceeded to tell him the entire story, from Mark's family moving in to the cruel ultimatum, the abandonment of Rusty, and the kindness I found at the Warm Paws Haven. I told it not with hysterics or tears, but with the cold, factual precision of a witness giving testimony. He listened patiently, his expression shifting from professional interest to deep personal concern, and finally, to a kind of grim understanding. When I was finished, he was silent for a full minute. He looked at me over the top of his spectacles. "Eleanor, as your attorney, I must advise you that completely disinheriting your only child is a serious step, one that is often contested." "Let him contest it," I said flatly. "I will write a letter in my own hand to be attached to the will, explaining my exact reasons. My mind is perfectly sound, my reasons are clear, and my resolve is absolute. My son has shown me his character, and I am choosing not to reward it." "I see," he said, nodding slowly. "And the new beneficiary?" "I want my entire estate," I said, the words feeling powerful and clean on my tongue. "Every penny of my savings, my investments, and the full value from the sale of my house and all its contents, to be left to a single entity." I pushed a slip of paper across the desk. On it, I had written the name and address I had so frantically scribbled down 2 nights before. I want it all to go to the Warm Paws Haven, the animal shelter in Millersburg. Mr. Davison picked up the paper and read it. He looked at me, and a small, slow smile spread across his face. "Eleanor," he said, a newfound respect in his voice, "I believe we can have this drafted for you to sign by the end of the week. It will be ironclad." I left his office feeling lighter than I had in months. I hadn't just punished my son's greed, I had transformed my life's work into a force for good. My legacy wouldn't be a house for Tiffany to redecorate. It would be 1,000 warm beds for 1,000 lost souls like Rusty. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were thick with a tense, unspoken truce. Mark and Tiffany were on their best behavior, a cloying and artificial performance of concern. Tiffany offered to cook. Mark offered to mow the lawn, and they both spoke to me in gentle, condescending tones, as if I were a fragile, confused old woman who had simply had a bad day. They never mentioned Rusty's brief exile, treating his presence as if it were a minor inconvenience they were graciously tolerating. They didn't understand. I wasn't fragile, and I wasn't confused. I was a judge who had already passed sentence. They were just prisoners unaware that the verdict had been read. My new notarized will was safely stored in Mr. Davison's office vault, a silent time bomb waiting to explode their world of entitlement. Thanksgiving Day arrived, gray and cold. Tiffany insisted on cooking a massive turkey, filling my small house with the smells of a happy family I no longer possessed. Their attempts at festive cheer felt grotesque. As we sat at the dining table, Mark raised his glass of sparkling cider. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, smiling at me. "To Mom, for her generosity, for taking us in, for everything. We're so grateful to have you." Tiffany and the kids murmured their agreement. It was the perfect opening. I let him finish, a placid smile on my face. When the toast was done, I cleared my throat. "Thank you, Mark. That's very kind," I said. "And since we're in the spirit of gratitude and family finances, I actually have something for you." Hope flared in his eyes. He probably imagined I was giving him a check, a down payment for their new life, a reward for his recent charade of good behavior. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a crisp, white envelope. I slid it across the table to him. He took it eagerly, a greedy little smile playing on his lips. He tore it open, expecting stock certificates or a deed transfer. Instead, he pulled out 2 documents. The first was a high-quality color photocopy of the first page of my new last will and testament, the part that clearly stated, "I hereby revoke all prior wills and codicils and declare this to be my final will." The second document was a donation receipt. It was a formal acknowledgement of a $10,000 gift I had made just last week, a preliminary offering from my savings to the Warm Paws Haven. His smile vanished. His face went from confusion to disbelief, then flushed a dark, mottled red. What is this?" he stammered, his voice a choked whisper. Tiffany snatched the papers from his hand, her eyes scanning them frantically. Her perfectly made-up face contorted in an ugly snarl. "You're leaving everything to a dog pound?" she shrieked. "That's right," I said calmly, taking a sip of water. I looked directly at Mark. "You gave me a choice, remember? You said, 'It's me or that mangy dog.' You made me choose who was more important. I thought about it long and hard. You chose to abandon my oldest, most loyal friend out in the cold, hoping he'd die, just to make your life more convenient. The animal shelter you dumped him at gave him a warm bed, comfort, and kindness, expecting nothing in return." I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping but losing none of its steel. "So, I've made my choice. My entire fortune will go to the people who demonstrated the values Robert and I worked our whole lives to build. It will go to the shelter that gave him a warm bed. That is my new will. That is my true inheritance. It's an inheritance of kindness. And you, my son, get nothing, because you showed none." The explosion of their anger was everything I expected, but it didn't touch me. Their threats, their insults, their accusations of senility, it was all just noise. I sat there, serenely, as their world of entitlement crumbled around them. Later that evening, after they had stormed out to get some air, I sat in my armchair. Rusty, hearing the blessed silence, padded over and laid his heavy gray head on my knee. I stroked his soft ears, his warm, steady breathing a comforting presence in the quiet room. I had lost a son, but I had saved my soul, and I had ensured that for years to come, countless other lost souls would have a safe place to land, a warm bed, and a second chance, all because of one mangy old dog who was worth more than a fortune.